Are you living your own life or playing a character that others created for you? Right now, as you watch this video, how many masks are covering your true face? Carl Jung discovered something that might shock you. Freedom doesn't begin when you conquer the external world, but when you stop pretending to be someone you're not. Imagine for a moment that you wake up on any ordinary morning and, looking at yourself in the mirror, don't recognize the person staring back at you. Not because your face has changed, but because you realize for the first time that the person in the reflection is a stranger you've been feeding for years. This person wears clothes that others approve of, speaks words that are expected to be heard, smiles when they should cry, and hides their deepest truths behind a flawless performance. This isn't fiction. It's the silent reality of millions of people who wake up every day to perform a role they never consciously chose. Carl Gustav Jung, one of history's greatest psychiatrists, dedicated his entire life to unraveling this fundamental mystery of human existence. Why do we unique and irreplaceably complex beings spend our entire lives trying to be an edited version of ourselves? Jung called these masks persona, a word that comes from Latin and literally means theater mask. In ancient Greek theater, actors wore physical masks to represent different characters. Jung realized that we do exactly the same thing, except our masks are invisible and often so well glued to our faces that we forget we're wearing them. Think about your own life. Do you act the same way at work, at home, with your parents, with your close friends? Of course not. And there's nothing wrong with that to a certain extent. The problem arises when these different versions of yourself become so dominant that you completely lose touch with who you really are underneath all these layers. The modern tragedy is that we've been taught to believe that these masks are necessary to survive in the world. From childhood, we learn that certain parts of our personality are unacceptable, that certain feelings must be hidden, that certain ideas are too dangerous to be expressed. Gradually, we build a socially acceptable version of ourselves, and this version becomes so real to others and to ourselves that we begin to believe it is all we are. But Jung made a revolutionary discovery. Underneath all these masks exists an authentic core, a true self that remains untouched by all social performances. He called this the self, with a capital S. Not the small ego that worries about approval and status, but something much larger, wiser, and infinitely more powerful. The question that changes everything is this: what would happen if you had the courage to remove these masks one by one and find that authentic self that's been waiting patiently underneath all these layers of social conditioning? Perhaps you're recognizing yourself in this description and feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because finally someone is talking about this feeling you've been carrying for years, the feeling of living a life that is not completely your own. Anxiety because if it's true that you've been wearing masks, it means much of what you've built might be based on a false foundation. Let me tell you a story that Jung used to illustrate this point. There was a man who every morning put on an impeccable suit, adjusted his tie, combed his hair perfectly, and left to work at a bank. To everyone who knew him, he was the model of professionalism and responsibility. He smiled politely, kept schedules, followed rules. But every night, when he got home, he would lock himself in the bathroom, look in the mirror, and feel a deep emptiness in his chest. Who is this person I've become? He would ask himself. One day, this man had a disturbing dream. He was on a giant stage, dressed as a clown, but couldn't make anyone laugh. The audience was in absolute silence, and he realized he had completely forgotten how to be funny. When he woke up, he understood the message. He had spent so much time playing the role of the serious professional that he had lost touch with his spontaneous and creative nature. This story echoes in millions of lives. How many people do you know who seem to be living lives they didn't truly choose? How many times have you caught yourself saying things you don't believe, doing things that don't give you pleasure, pursuing goals that aren't really yours? Jung observed something fascinating. The most unhappy people he treated in his practice weren't necessarily those who had objectively difficult lives. They were those who had built perfect lives according to external standards, but who felt completely disconnected from themselves. They were successful executives who felt empty, exemplary housewives who felt invisible, brilliant students who felt like imposters. The pain of living an inauthentic life is one of the most subtle and devastating forms of human suffering. It's not dramatic like an obvious tragedy, but it's constant like a toothache that never stops. It's waking up every day with the feeling that something is missing, but not knowing exactly what. It's being successful in others' eyes and feeling like a failure inside. It's being surrounded by people and feeling profoundly alone. If this description touched something in you, know that you're not alone on this journey. In fact, recognizing this disconnection is the first step toward true freedom. It's the moment when you stop blaming external circumstances for your dissatisfaction and begin to look inward at the layers of conditioning you've internalized over the years. If this idea has already resonated with you, imagine what comes next. Subscribe so you don't miss this journey of discovery that could completely transform how you see yourself and life. Here's where Jung reveals something that might initially sound scary, but is profoundly liberating. You're not obligated to be the person you've been until now. The masks you wear are not permanent. They are choices you made, often unconsciously, and like every choice, they can be changed. But Jung wasn't suggesting that you simply throw all your masks away at once. That would be imprudent and potentially destructive. What he proposed was something much more sophisticated, the process of individuation, the gradual journey of becoming who you really are, consciously integrating all aspects of your personality, including those you've been avoiding or denying. The first step in this process is developing what Jung called persona awareness. This means beginning to notice, without judgment, when and how you change, depending on the social environment. Observe yourself during an entire day. How do you behave at work versus at home? How does your voice change when you speak with your boss versus when you speak with your best friend? How does your body posture alter in different situations? This observation isn't for you to criticize yourself, but to develop awareness. Most people live these transitions completely automatically. They don't notice that they're constantly adjusting their personality like a chameleon adjusts its colors. The simple act of noticing these changes is already a giant step toward freedom. Jung discovered something fascinating. When people begin to observe their own masks, they're often shocked by how different they are in different situations. Some realize there are parts of their personality they only express in very specific contexts, and other parts they never express at all. For example, maybe you're naturally a very curious and questioning person, but at work you've learned to always be agreeable and never question authority. Or perhaps you have a deep artistic side, but in your family this was always seen as a waste of time, so you hid this part of yourself. Jung called these hidden parts the shadow, not because they're necessarily negative, but because they've been pushed out of consciousness's light. The process of recovering these lost parts of yourself is simultaneously challenging and liberating. It's challenging because it means confronting deep fears about rejection and judgment. Many of our masks were created as protection mechanisms. We developed them because, at some point in our lives, we learned that certain parts of our personality weren't safe to express. But here's Jung's revolutionary insight. These dangerous or unacceptable parts of our personality don't simply disappear because we ignore them. They continue operating backstage in our psyche, influencing our decisions and behaviors in ways we don't even perceive. They appear in our dreams, in our moments of unexplained anger, in our disproportionate reactions to certain situations. True freedom comes when you stop fighting against these parts of yourself and learn to consciously integrate them into your life. This doesn't mean acting impulsively or irresponsibly, but it means recognizing that you are a complex and multifaceted human being, and that this complexity is your strength, not your weakness. Jung had a patient who was an extremely meticulous and controlled accountant. For years, this man had lived a life of absolute order, but was suffering from severe anxiety and insomnia. During therapy, it was discovered that he had a repressed passion for dance. His spontaneous and creative side had been completely suppressed in favor of a professional and responsible persona. When he began integrating this passion into his life, first through private dance lessons, then amateur performances, not only did his anxiety decrease dramatically, but he also became more efficient and creative at work. This is the paradox of individuation. When you stop trying to be a perfect and limited version of yourself and embrace your total complexity, you don't become less functional in society, you become more authentically powerful. But there's an even deeper secret that few know, something Jung discovered only in the final stages of his own journey of self-knowledge. Jung's most shocking discovery was this: the masks you wear aren't just defenses against the external world. They're also defenses against your own power. You're not just hiding your weaknesses or unacceptable parts, you're hiding your true magnitude. Jung realized that most people aren't just afraid of being rejected for who they really are. They're afraid of discovering how powerful, creative, and limitless they really are. It's easier to live a small, controlled life than to confront the responsibility and potential that come with total authenticity. Think about it. If you really expressed all your creativity, all your passion, all your unique vision of the world, what would that require of you? What changes would you have to make in your life? What risks would you have to take? What people might you lose along the way? What limited versions of yourself would you have to abandon forever? Jung called this the fear of one's own light. It's the fear of shining too brightly, of standing out too much, of being too much for the world around you. Ironically, many people spend their entire lives feeling insufficient, when in reality, they're hiding because they're afraid of being excessive. He observed this constantly in his patients. A woman who called herself just an ordinary housewife revealed during therapy that she had revolutionary ideas about child education, but had never shared them because it wasn't her place. A man who had worked in a factory for decades discovered he had an extraordinary capacity to understand and resolve complex human conflicts, but had buried this talent because he came from a family that distrusted people who thought they were too smart. The truth Jung discovered is that each person carries within themselves a unique and irreplaceable potential. There are no two people in the world with exactly the same combination of talents, perspectives, experiences, and insights. But most people die without ever having fully expressed this uniqueness, because they were conditioned to believe that being normal is safer than being extraordinary. Here's the revelation that can change everything. The world desperately needs your specific authenticity. The problems we face as a society, from environmental issues to interpersonal conflicts, cannot be solved by people who think and act the same way. They require the radical diversity of perspectives that only emerges when each individual has the courage to be completely themselves. When Jung finally removed his own masks and began expressing his most revolutionary ideas about the human psyche, he was initially rejected by the scientific community of his time. His theories about the collective unconscious, archetypes, and individuation were considered too radical, too mystical for academic psychology, but Jung made a choice. He chose to be true to himself, even if it meant being misunderstood. The result? His ideas didn't just survive, but became some of the most influential contributions to understanding human nature. Millions of people around the world have found freedom and meaning through insights he could only share because he had the courage to remove his own masks. True freedom isn't the absence of responsibility or commitment. It's the total presence of yourself in everything you do. It's waking up every morning knowing that the person you're choosing to be that day is an authentic reflection of who you really are, not a performance based on what others expect from you. Jung left us a profound gift, the understanding that you don't need to wait for permission to be who you really are. You don't need to wait until you've achieved certain things, or until you're in a perfect relationship, or until you find the ideal job. You can start right now, in this moment, to gently remove the masks that no longer serve who you're becoming. The process isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But every small act of authenticity, every moment when you choose to be truthful instead of convenient, every time you express a genuine idea instead of repeating what's expected, every instant when you allow your uniqueness to shine, is a step toward the freedom Jung knew was possible for every human being. Your life isn't a rehearsal. It's not preparation for something that will happen later. It's the real performance, happening now, and you are the only actor qualified to play the leading role. The masks may have been necessary to get you this far, but they don't have to define where you go from here. The final question Jung leaves us is simply this: when will you start living as if your authenticity were not just acceptable, but absolutely essential to the world? If this video touched something real in you, if these words resonated with the truth you carry in your chest, then be part of this journey with us. Like this video so more people can find these transformative ideas. Write in the comments which mask you are ready to start removing. Your courage could inspire someone who needs to see they're not alone on this path. And subscribe to this channel, because we'll continue exploring the deepest mysteries of human experience and the paths to a more authentic and meaningful life. Share this video with someone you know needs to hear these words. Sometimes the right message at the right moment can be the catalyst a person needs to begin their own journey back home, to themselves.